أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We're gonna start off with check-ins. So you guys get to tell us, share about your week, about your day, how, if there's anything that you guys learned, anything that you guys have identified as capital T truths, anything that you learned about yourself, how are you managing your discipline, or how are you staying disciplined, and how are you maintaining that as you are going forward, or what are some challenges that you feel that you would like addressed, or you're struggling with that you would need some clarification in, for example, anything of those that sort. So yeah, how do we form? And this is a thought experiment we do. Sometimes it's riddles, and we come back and answer that riddle. And it's like, you know, a case that comes up, for example, and then we go over and see like how we might approach it. Sometimes thought experiment. In this case, it's a thought experiment. How do we form and change habits and executive functioning? How do we form them? How do we change them? How do we maintain them? How do we do all that stuff? So this is the thought experiment that you guys do, and then we go through some videos and some discussion and stuff, and then we come back and answer that question. Okay, so just keep this in mind. Don't answer it right now. Just think about it. Think about the questions that I asked here. Think about this question, and then we're going to continue from there, inshallah. So don't answer anything yet. I did read the chat, by the way. When you feel relief, when you let go of certain things that you don't have control over yet. And the last part was, sometimes, you know, you just need practice to do that. So this is where that comes in right here. But it went perfectly. Okay, so with that, let's move on to, this is the process of transformation that we've been going over. And I've kept these slides here so that we can constantly look over them. Step 0 was being realistic, so finding the capital T truths, so you can align your lowercase t truths to them. And then once you've done that, and you know, you can always learn more, and you're always going to be learning new ones. But in the meantime, when it comes to transformation, you should know exactly what your end goal looks like. This could be your vision, or it could be like a particular objective that you're trying to achieve in the process of a longer, in the process of achieving a longer term goal, or like an objective or a vision or something like that. So this right here is the first step, knowing exactly where you want to end up. It should be as clear as possible. It should be extremely detailed. You should be able to visualize it. You should be able to like visualize how you feel in that situation. You should be able to like sort of like feel how you would feel when you actually do achieve that goal or vision, or you know, whatever it might be. So for example, if you wanted to win the Olympics, for example, in a particular category of sports or whatever, how would you feel with that gold medal, for example, right? How would you feel? What does that look like? Describe the entire end result. You know how in some movies they have the ending first, and then they show you like how that, you know, how everything happened until that point, right? So let's say like 22 hours earlier or whatever and stuff, and they kind of like catch you up until where that person is right now, right? So here, it's like, you know, the end vision. You need to be as vivid about it as possible. And it should be meaningful, because if it's not meaningful, then you're not necessarily going to be able to get to that point, because you're going to have to really force yourself to do it, right? But if it's meaningful, if you have a purpose behind it and stuff, and you really like are passionate about this purpose, you're going to keep going towards it. Now, the next thing is, you should have an understanding of where you stand currently, right? So if I want to go to, for example, Wilmington Beach, right? I need to know what that looks like. I need to know how to recognize when I'm going to get there and so on. So I need to know all those descriptions and details. But I also need to know where I'm at right now. Because I could say I want to get to Wilmington Beach, point B, but if I don't know where I'm at, maybe I'm in, for example, Raleigh, or maybe I'm in like Chapel Hill, for example, or maybe I'm in Charlotte. If I don't know where I'm at, I'm not going to be able to really like, you know, put mile markers in place, like the short-term goals, which is step 3. So step 2 is really like assessing where I'm at, and I should be as honest and raw about it as possible. Because if I'm not honest about it, if I'm not being raw about it, if I'm kind of hiding certain things, or I'm just kind of like saying that, you know what, I don't want to admit where I'm really at, right? If you want to learn like memorize Quran, or if you want to learn Arabic, or if you want to do anything in this, like if you want to, for example, like master martial arts, for example, whatever it is, if you're not honest about it, if you're sort of like you're saying like you're putting yourself at a higher place than you actually are at, right? And that can become an obstacle. And if you're being like, if you're lowering yourself out of humbleness or whatever and stuff, right? But it's not your reality, then obviously you're gonna like misunderstand, or your mile markers are gonna be off, right? So you want to be as objective as possible, be as honest as possible. You should analyze your current skills, the levels and stuff. You should analyze the weaknesses and so on that you might have, and that's it. Be as raw as possible and be as honest as possible, be as objective as possible. Now, when I say relative to baseline, this is the concept coming from positive psychology. This is a new framing of psychology that's been about maybe like 3 decades old, but it's been picking up a lot more in the last 1 decade. This whole like framework and so on. So what this means is that our weaknesses are only weaknesses because we haven't yet improved them to a higher level, right? So if you have certain skills, let's say there's like a set of 10 skills, right? And our weaknesses are going to be those skills that are lower relative to all the other ones and stuff, right? And also that means, for example, some of them might be level 1 compared to other ones that might be a level 10. So the weaknesses are only weaknesses in the sense that they are closer to the baseline, and that they haven't been worked on as much yet. Yet means you still have the option to do it. So you can work on those and they can become strengths essentially, eventually. So keep that in mind, that just because you have weaknesses, it doesn't mean that you're stuck there forever. But we're just mentioning this as weakness just to say that relative to the baseline, relative to level 0, they're closer to it compared to the other one. So if I work on those things, then they can also become strengths. And so that's the new framework that psychologists are using nowadays. That's positive psychology, or strengths-based psychology, essentially. And then step 3 is dividing point A and point B with short-term goals. And these are longer than like the day-to-day plans and stuff, right? You might have a daily plan, for example, a daily schedule. Here's what I'm going to do every single day and stuff, right? That might be a very small thing. But when I'm talking about short-term goals, it might be like a 1-month goal, or like 3-month goal, or a 6-month goal even. And then that's it. So these are mile markers. So these are checkpoints essentially to get you from point A to point B. And step 4, when we get there, inshallah, we're only step 3 right now. When we get there, that's more on in terms of how do we like fine tune specific things, like individually. So if a person wants to lose weight, for example, what they need to do is they need to understand, okay, here's where I am right now, here's where I want to go to, right? And here's sort of like the plan for the next 6 months, right? So I'm going to have like a 12-week plan that I might give, or a 6-week plan that I might give a client. Usually it's like a 12-week plan that I might give them. Sometimes it might be longer, sometimes it might be shorter, sometimes it might be like a 4-week plan, whatever it is, right? Ultimately, I'll give them a plan, and I'll say, okay, we're going to work on this for now, and then at the end, we're going to check in to see where your status is and stuff, right? And then we're going to see, okay, how do we need to adjust things if necessary, or maintain what we're doing and so on. But day-to-day stuff would be like the individual, like let's say for that particular day, you're working on particular parts of your body, whatever, right? Then for that day, whatever your workout plan looks like for that particular day is what's going to be in this part right here. But that's very fine-tuned and it's very specific to that day. And so that's something that we can work on, like optimizing as we go forward. But we need to understand sort of like the general breakdown of how we're going to get there. So like the different phases of the journey, essentially, you can say, the transformation process. And then step 4 is actually the details for every little detail, or like more or less like the daily events that you might be doing, the daily things that you might be doing, the sequence of things, and so on. So that's when we get there, inshallah. But for now, we're just kind of going over to breaking down the big stuff into chunks, and those chunks will break down even further. So with that, this is the next slide that we've been just reviewing. I just have these slides there. I usually go through this quicker, but today, since we have new people, that's why I spend a lot more time on this. But usually you're going to just see this kind of sitting here. I kind of like shared, like I just kind of put the slide up for a few seconds. People remember these things. This is for you to just keep in mind. So notice the words that we're using. Fear, right? These are roadblocks that prevent us from actually sustaining our transformation. Among them, fear, right? And that's that you're feeling of failure, feeling of injury, fear of success. Maybe you're afraid what success is going to look like, right? Or how that's going to impact you potentially in a negative way or positive way, whatever. So it prevents you from actually letting go of your lowercase c truths. Also, having a fixed mindset, not a growth mindset, right? Which is a fluid mindset, which is saying that, I'm permanently like this. No matter what I do, I'm not going to get better at things and stuff, right? So that's also what we call a learned helplessness mentality. And then having unrealistic expectations. So that's why step 0 was being real about things, learning the capital T truths. Misunderstandings, misconnections, you sort of misassociated two things and stuff, you misconnected to different things. Feeling that you don't have time, for example, as opposed to actually setting time for these things, right? Kind of not understanding the concept of time and how to manage it. And then not having an ultimate purpose, like the bigger why. Why am I doing something? So having no meaning attached to something can also be a roadblock, because you can only do something for no reason, like for only a certain amount of time, right? Ultimately, there has to be a reason that drives you. If you like candy because it tastes really good and stuff, right? So that's your big why and stuff, right? But then if you are just doing things just because you have to, right? But you don't understand why you're doing it and stuff, you're going to eventually get overwhelmed and you're not going to continue. So these are things that become roadblocks. So I'm going to keep on, presenting these slides in the beginning every time for a few seconds. I'm not going to comment on that much, but just for you guys to keep in mind. And then these are some possible case studies that we could do. We've done several case studies in the past. And then I switched over a little bit to going into these thought experiments and these riddles and so on. But now we might go back to these. And I always leave, a slide at the end for you guys if you actually want to like break down something into steps, then we can do that. So this is open for you guys to do that, because I also do coaching, so I can help you kind of break down these things. So this is going back to a particular thing that you have in mind. It could be one of those case studies that I showed. It could be something else that you want to have, and then we'll break it down into these steps, and we'll stop at step 3. We're not going to go to step 4 yet because we haven't gotten there yet with the strategies. So with that, let's start with our brain games. So you get to pick one of these things to watch first. So pick one.
Training the brain.
Which one? Oh, training the brain. Okay. So let's go with that. There are going to be times that I might speed this up because I just want you to get the gist of it. I don't need to get you to understand every little detail of it, right? So we're just going to get the gist of things. So sometimes I'm going to speed up the thing. And you can go back at your own time and actually go back in detail and watch the videos again.
By the way, we're at 12 minutes.
So, I have a confession to make. I only recently learned how to drive, and it was really hard. Now, this wasn't an older brain thing. Do you remember what it was like when you first learned how to drive? When every decision you made was so conscious and deliberate? I come home from my lessons completely wiped out mentally. Now, as a...
Alright, so lots of good tips to answer our question, the thought experiment that we're doing. I hope there was a lot of stuff that you guys picked out from here that was also relevant to some of the discussions that we had earlier today. So with that, and I'm not going to mention those today because I want you to pick those up, and we'll discuss that when we get there at the end, inshallah. So with that, pick the next thing. Okay, let's see. Episode 9. Okay. Now there are episodes before this. If you are joining today that you didn't see the episodes before, it would be really useful if you guys get the chance to watch the other episodes before. In our previous lectures, we've done those previous lectures, and we had comments on them too. Yeah, it is Crash Course. So we have a bunch of different ones that we've gone through. So if you guys get a chance, go ahead and watch the other ones as well after this.
I believe
you can actually watch them on our uploads, because we also have comments on them. Or if you want, you can also watch them on your own, but then go back and see the comments that we made on those, inshallah. Because there are certain things, remember, that Islamically are going to be slightly different than the things that scientists know for a fact, right? Because science has not yet been able to answer certain things. So
For the actual
keep that in mind. Okay, with that, let me start this. Ready?
Comedian Mike Birbiglia was having trouble with sleep. Though not with the actual sleeping part. One night, while staying in a hotel, he dreamed a guided missile was on its way to his bed, and in his dream, he jumped out of the window to escape it. Unfortunately, he also did this not dream from the second floor, and the window was not open. This little episode cost him 33 stitches and a trip to a sleep specialist. Mike now sleeps in zipped-up mummy bags for his own safety. Lesson here, sleep is not some break time when your brain or your body just goes dormant. Far from it. In truth, sleep is just another state of consciousness. And only in the past few decades have we begun to really plummet its depths. From why we sleep in the first place, to what goes on in our brains when we do, to what happens when we can't sleep. And there is a lot that science has to say about your dreams. Talk about weird, it's like Sigmund Freud meets Neil Gaiman. So even though it may seem like you're dead to the world when you sleep, your perceptual window remains slightly open. And kind of like Mike Birbiglia's hotel room window, a trip through it can make for a pretty wild ride. But for your safety and enjoyment, I'm here to guide you through this state of consciousness where you'll learn more than a few things about the human mind, including your own. And here's hoping you won't need any stitches when we're through. Technically speaking, sleep is a periodic, natural, reversible, and near total loss of consciousness, meaning it's different than hibernation, being in a coma, or in, say, an anesthetic oblivion. Although we spend about a third of our lives sleeping, and we know that it's essential to our health and survival, there still isn't a scientific consensus for why we do it. Part of it probably has to do with simple recuperation, allowing our neurons and other cells to rest and repair themselves. Sleep also supports growth, because that's when our pituitary glands release growth hormones, which is why babies sleep all the time. Plus, sleep has all kinds of benefits from mental function, like improving memory, giving our brains time to process the events of the day, and boosting our creativity. But even if we're not quite sure all of the reasons why we sleep, technology has given us great insight into how we sleep. And for that, we can thank little Armand Asarinsky. One night in early 1950s Chicago, 8-year-old Armand was tucked into his bed by his father. But this night, instead of getting a kiss on the forehead, little Armand got some electrodes taped to his face. Armand's dad was Eugene Asarinsky, a grad student looking to test out a new electroencephalograph, or EEG machine, that measures the brain's electrical activity. That night, as his son slept peacefully, he watched the machine go bonkers with brainwave patterns, and after making sure that the machine wasn't somehow broken, discovered that the brain doesn't just power down during sleep, as most scientists thought. Instead, he had discovered the sleep stage we now call REM, or rapid eye movement, a perplexing period when the sleeping brain is buzzing with activity, even though the body is in a deep slumber. Asarinsky and his colleague Nathaniel Kleitman went on to become pioneers of sleep research. Since then, sleep specialists armed with similar technology have shown that we experience 4 distinct stages of sleep, each defined by unique brainwave patterns. Say just going to bed. All day, your endocrine system has been releasing awake hormones like cortisol. But with nightfall comes the release of sleepy melatonin hormones from your pineal gland. Your brain is relaxed but still awake, a level of activity that EEGs measure as alpha waves. You're feeling sleepy, your breath slows, and suddenly, you're asleep. This exact moment is clearly evident on an EEG reading, as those alpha waves immediately transition to the irregular, non-rapid eye movement stage 1, NREM1 waves. It's in this first stage of sleep that you might experience hypnagogic sensation, those brief moments when you feel like you're falling and your body jerks, startling you. As you relax more deeply, you move into NREM2 stage sleep, as your brain starts exhibiting bursts of rapid brainwave activity called sleep. You're now definitely asleep, but you could still be easily awakened. NREM3 comes along with slow-rolling delta waves. We now know that you can have brief and fragmentary dreams in the first 3 stages of sleep, but eventually you'll get to the most important stage, full REM sleep. That famous stage of sugar plum slumber that makes eyeballs go nuts, grants vivid visual dreams, and provides the namesake for certain famous rock bands. Some sleep is kind of paradoxical. Your motor cortex is jumping all over the place, but your brainstem is blocking those messages, leaving your muscles so relaxed that you're basically paralyzed, except for your eyes. That whole sleep cycle repeats itself every 90 minutes or so, transitioning back and forth between the stages of sleep. Obviously, sleep is super important, and lack of sleep is terrible for your health, mental ability, and mood. In fact, it's a predictor for depression and has been linked to things like weight gain as your hunger-arousing and suppressing hormones get out of whack. Sleep deprivation also causes immune system suppression and slowed reaction time, which is why you should not drive sleepy. Of course, a bad night's sleep here and there is part of life, but there are a host of bona fide sleep disorders out there that can make your life pretty terrible, or in Mike Birbiglia's case, land you in the emergency room. We've got insomnia, which is persistent problems falling or staying asleep, and kind of its opposite, narcolepsy, whose sufferers sometimes experience brief, uncontrollable attacks of overwhelming sleepiness called sleep attacks. This, as you can imagine, can get in the way of all sorts of things that you might enjoy doing, like driving, eating, pole vaulting. Narcolepsy may have several different causes, including a deficiency in the neurotransmitter hypocretin, which helps keep you awake. But in more rare cases, brain trauma, infection, and disease may contribute to it as well. So that's pretty rare, but you probably know someone with sleep apnea, the disorder that causes sleepers to temporarily stop breathing until their decreased oxygen levels wake them up. Birbiglia, meanwhile, turned out to have a REM sleep behavior disorder, which we don't fully understand yet, but appears to be associated with a dopamine deficiency. Then we've got night terrors, which are as terrible as they sound, spurring increased heart and breathing rates, screaming, and thrashing that's seldom remembered upon waking. Night terrors are most common in children under 7 and may be spurred by stress, fatigue, sleep deprivation, and sleeping in unfamiliar surroundings. Much like sleepwalking and sleep
Lucy mentioned there might be. Obviously, they don't know the details yet. But from an Islamic perspective, it could also be from other things and stuff, So these are definitely possibilities. In addition to that, we also have other possibilities that we also accommodate in an Islamic perspective.
Walking, night terrors occur during the NREM3 stage of sleep and are not the same as nightmares, which occur, like most dreaming, during REM sleep. But oh, in REM sleep, what dreams may come. There you are, running naked as your teeth fall out, being chased down the beach by a Matt Damon centaur. You wake.
Okay, so let me comment on that really quick. So the Prophet ﷺ told us that there are 3 types of dreams. one of them comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's usually good, and it gives you some sort of like foresight, or it gives you some sort of glad tidings and something like that, right? Then there's also what you've had on your mind the entire time. So if you had this thing in your mind, you're probably going to see exactly what they're showing over here, right? I don't know why you would think about this in your day, but anyways, let's assume you did, right? But even if you didn't, like let's say that you were thinking about like, you know, a particular problem that you had to solve or whatever, or maybe you're stressed out about an exam that you have to take and stuff, right? So you might actually dream about that in your dream. But that has nothing to do with anything except that this is what was in your mind, and it's just kind of playing out. On the other hand, there is a third option, which is that it comes from shaitan, and these are usually the ones that are called nightmares. They usually do involve things like falling and stuff from something, somebody's chasing you and stuff, and things like that, right? And you kind of running and running and running. Somebody wants to attack you, somebody wants to kill you and stuff. Usually you might see dark stuff or whatever. So these are usually the things that are going to be from shaitan. And so the Prophet ﷺ gave us that insight. And of course, in scientific world, these are just going to be classified as nightmares. They don't know why this is happening or how to stop them happening, but this is something that they feel, or this is something that they know happens, but not the why behind it.
You got feeling around your mouth thinking, what? Welcome to your dreams, those vivid emotional images racing through your sleeping brain, often providing a backdrop so bizarre that it may seem like David Lynch, Terry Gilliam, and Tim Burton are trying to out-weird each other at a film festival. A really, really long film festival, considering the average person spends about 6 years of their lives dreaming. So yeah, sometimes you have really crazy dreams, but mostly your average dream just sort of unpacks and reshuffles what you did that day. For example, last night I dreamt about Tumblr, because I spent a lot of time on Tumblr yesterday. If you played Tetris all afternoon, you might dream of blocks falling from the sky. If something traumatic happened to you, your brain might provide you with a nightmare to help extinguish your daytime fears. Thanks, brain. And again, you might be unable to
So obviously you mentioned two of those things, but not the third one, right?
stop dreaming about the trauma, which we'll look at in the future when we discuss post-traumatic stress disorder. Our two-track minds, of course, allow us to register more stimuli than we outwardly acknowledge during the day, and in that way, the sounds of car alarms or stinky dog farts that you might not even have noticed get incorporated in your dream too. And that's all interesting and weird and sometimes a little gross, but what's the real purpose of dreaming? Why do we do this? Well, as you might have guessed, there's more than one idea out there. The study of dreams is a mix of neuroscience and psychology known as onirology. Onirus is Greek for dream, and if you're a Neil Gaiman fan, you might recognize it as one of the Sandman's many names, the one that comes with a toga at Orpheus's head. But Sandman aside, if you want to talk about dreams, you might want to start with our old friend Freud. In his landmark 1900 book, The Interpretation of Dreams, Freud proposed that our dreams offer us wish fulfillment. He thought our dreams manifest content, the stuff you remember in the morning, was a sort of censored and symbolic version of whatever inner conflict was really going on in that dream's unconscious or latent content. Not surprisingly, the wish fulfillment theory lacks scientific chops and has, for the most favor, because really you can interpret a dream any way you want. Like sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Luckily, we have some other theories to consider. The information processing theory proposes that our dreams help us sort out and process the day's events and fix them into our memories. This may be particularly important when it comes to learning and remembering new information, and some studies show that people recall new tasks better after a good REM sleep full of dreams. But if brainwave readings show us anything, it's that there is a lot going on in your brain when you dream, and the physiological function theory suggests that dreaming may promote neural development and preserve neural pathways by providing the brain with stimulation. When our brains are stimulated, they expand their connections more. So babies, for example, spend much of their sleep time dreaming, perhaps in part to help their brain circuitry develop more quickly. This is similar to the idea that dreams are part of our cognitive development. By this model, dreams draw on our knowledge and understanding of the world, mimicking reality and engaging those same brain networks that light up when we daydream. And finally, there are theories that focus on the way REM sleep triggers neural activity and the idea that dreams are just sort of accidental side effects. The brain's attempt to weave a story out of a bunch of random sights, emotions, and memories, which is how in Dreamland I might actually marry that Matt Damon centaur and give birth to a baby with banana fingers and a raccoon tail. For now, scientists continue to debate the function of dreams, but one thing we know for sure is that REM sleep is vital both biologically and psychologically. But hey, you think your dreams are not far? Next week, we're looking at other altered states of consciousness, where you'll learn what your brain really looks like on drugs and whether you can actually hypnotize someone to do your evil bidding or just act like a chicken. For now, if you stayed awake during this episode, you learned about the 4 stages of sleep and REM 1, 2, and 3 and REM itself, as well as some of the major theories for the psychological purpose of dreaming, including information processing, physiological function, cognitive development, and neural activity models. Thanks for watching, especially to all of our subbable subscribers who make this whole channel possible. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of Crash Course, get a special laptop decal, or even be animated into an upcoming episode, just go to subbable.com/Crash Course. This edited by Blake DiPestino, and our consultant is Dr. Ranji Bhagwan. Our director and editor is Nicholas Jenkins. The script supervisor is Michael Aranda, who is also our sound designer, and our graphics team is Thought Cafe.
All right. So, as you noticed, that there's a lot of theories on this. So the question is not in science. In science, the way that it works is that you have to be able to propose a testable hypothesis, and then you have to be able to test it out. But when it comes to like hypotheses in this case, when it comes to looking at something that you don't really have tangible stuff, you can't really like touch dreams, or you can't really test them out, right? Like, how do you actually go into a person's dream and kind of figure out what's happening there and why it's happening and stuff, right? So a lot of this stuff is going to be more theoretical, and then they have proposals and stuff, and they try to test it out. And again, it might be they might fall short in certain things, they might work out in certain ways and stuff. So this is the current state of science. Just to keep in mind over here. So when you go to people that are mental health professionals, or when you go to people that are the sleep experts and so on, Just keep in mind that this is what the state of science is at, and this is what they're going to be running with. So just when it comes to expectations, you should have the right expectation. You shouldn't go into thinking that this person understands everything, how like brain works, how sleep works, and all those things. Yeah, just some tips too for you guys, inshallah. So I guess I'll go ahead and go with number 10, or you can go with number 11. Number 10 is the altered state of mind, and then number 11 is don't remember number 11. Yeah, I guess we'll find out what number 11 is. I just slipped my mind right now. But anyways, do you want to go with number 11 first, or number 10? Okay, number 11. Okay, number 11. The surprise, huh?
Freelancer? Go to
Pavlov rings a bell. The name Ivan Pavlov rings a bell. It's because his experiments are among the most famous in the history of psychology. His work contributed to the foundation of the behaviorist school of thought that viewed psychology as an empirically rigorous science focused on observable behaviors and not unobservable
This is about training your brain, by the way.
internal mental processes. Even though today we view psychology as the science of both behavior and mental processes, Pavlov's influence was tremendous. His research helped pave the path for more experimental rigor in behavioral research right up to the present day. Born in 1849 in Russia, Pavlov was never much for psychology. After giving up on his original aspirations to become a Russian Orthodox priest like his father, he instead earned a medical degree and spent nearly 20 years studying the digestive system, earning Russia's first Nobel Prize in his mid-50s for his research expanding our understanding of how stomachs worked. He didn't study human stomachs, though, because the procedures were terrible and cruel. He studied dog stomachs, and while researching those dogs, the animals would salivate at a mere whiff of their dinner. At first, he found all that slobber annoying, but soon started to suspect that this behavior was actually a simple but important form of learning. For us scholars of psychology, we can define learning as the process of acquiring through experience new and relatively enduring information or behaviors. Whether through association, observation, or just plain thinking, learning is what allows us to adapt to our environments and to survive. And as Pavlov began to discover, it wasn't only humans who learned. Soon enough, he was turning out his famous series of experiments in which he paired the presence of meat powder, yummy, which got the dogs to drooling, with lots of different neutral stimuli, things that wouldn't normally make you drool, like a certain sound or shining a light or a touch on the leg. And then Pavlov observed after several of these pairings, a dog would start to drool just.
There's this thing called CBT, and there's also NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, where they use this concept over here to train people. So hypnosis is what he's going to get into in the other previous video. Meaning like the previous episode, meaning episode number 10. So that's how hypnosis is used today, and it is something that helps people sort of get rid of certain fears and traumas and things like that. So just keep that in mind over here. And it's not something where you get them to do your evil bidding, as you was gonna say, but it's more like training a person, or kind of getting a person to think deeply about something, and then kind of break certain associations or actually form certain associations and so on. And this is the concept that they use.
The sound or the light or the touch. Even if there wasn't any slobber-inducing meat powder around, animals, he found, can exhibit associative learning. That's when a subject links certain events, behaviors, or stimuli together in the process of conditioning.
And this is what we were talking about earlier. Having bad experiences, those data points might make you associate certain things a certain way, but then if you get exposed to new data points, they might help actually change that set of the trend line and the line of breastfed.
Be the most elemental, basic form of learning a brain can do, but that doesn't mean that the processes behind conditioning are or ever were obvious, or for that matter, simple. In fact, the research that's gone into how we're conditioned by our environments has helped shape the science of psychology from a still kind of subjective thought exercise into the more rigorous discipline we know today. And it starred some of psychology's most notable and often controversial figures, including Pavlov, B.F. Skinner, and that guy who trained kids to be terrified of furry animals. Okay, I'm not a licensed dog trainer. Do they license dog trainers? I can't break down for you the sequence of steps in Pavlov's famous experiment to help you get a sense of how conditioning works. First, before conditioning, the dog just drools when it smells food. That smell is the unconditioned stimulus, and the slobbering, the unconditioned or natural response. The ringing sound, which at this point means nothing to the dog, is the neutral stimulus, and it produces no drooling. During conditioning, the unconditioned stimulus, the food smell, is paired with the neutral stimulus, the bell sound, and results in drooling. This is repeated many times until the association between the two stimuli is made in a stage called acquisition. By the time you get to the after conditioning phase, that old neutral stimulus has become a conditioned stimulus, because it now elicits the conditioned response of drooling. Sounds super simple, right? If you have a dog, you've probably seen it tap dance at the side of a leash, but in Pavlov's day, this whole series of steps hadn't really been studied in a lab setting or even thought about in scientific terms. Pavlov's work suggested that classical conditioning, as this kind of learning came to be known, could be an adaptive form of learning that helps an animal survive by changing its behavior to better suit its environment. In this case, a bell means food, and food means survival, so get ready. Not only that, but methodologically, classical conditioning shows how a process like learning can actually be studied through direct observation of behavior in real time without all those messy feelings and emotions. This is something Pavlov especially appreciated given his disdain for mentalistic concepts like consciousness and introspection championed by Freud. Behaviorist psychologists like Pavlov's younger American analogs B.F. Skinner and John B. Watson also embraced the notion that psychology was all about objective, observable behavior.
And people, when it comes to teaching, there's different theories or different models of how you can discipline kids, like our children, right? How do you interact with them? How do you discipline them, and so on? So one of the theories or one of the models is a more behavioral approach, and this is where a teacher actually institutes rules and like things, consequences and things like that, because they're trying to institute a sort of like a behavior pattern, right? Whereas in other cases, they might focus on, okay, there's a human being inside this person, or like there's a person that we're talking to, and this person, we want to help the person sort of figure out how to do this on their own, instead of us having to sort of like build these like subconscious connections, associations, essentially. So there are different models that teachers use, and there are different models that people use outside of the classroom and so on. But just something to keep in mind over here. So this is what he's talking about over here. Behaviorism is what's linked to those kinds of situations where the teacher is trying to train behaviors and not necessarily get a person to actually consciously make decisions of avoiding certain behaviors and so on. Those are different theories and different models, and they're based on different things. So just some feedback on that.
In his 1930 book Behaviorism, he argued that given a dozen healthy infants, he could train any one of them to be a doctor, artist, lawyer, or even a thief, regardless of their talents, tendencies, or ancestry. Oh, there, Watson. Thankfully, no one gave him any infants. In his most famous and, yes, controversial experiment, Watson conditioned a young child dubbed Little Albert to fear a white rat. Maybe that doesn't sound so bad, but he accomplished this by pairing the rat with a loud, scary noise over and over, and then demonstrated that the terror could branch out and be generalized to include other furry white objects like bunnies, dogs, or even fur coats. So yeah, that would not fly today, obviously, but Watson's research did make other psychologists wonder whether adults, too, were just holding tanks of conditioned emotions. And if so...
Did you get that? Certain things that we might have had experiences, certain negative experiences or traumas that we might have had, might actually limit us to from moving forward and becoming functional in certain things that we might otherwise not be functional in.
Whether new conditioning could be used to undo old conditioning. Like if you're terrified of roller coasters, but you made yourself ride one 10 times a day for 2 weeks, would your fears fade? For the record, recent exploration has revealed that the boy known as Little Albert sadly died a few years after these experiments, while Watson eventually left academia and got into advertising, where he put all that associative learning to lucrative use. So that's classical conditioning. But we've also got another kind of associative learning, operant conditioning. If classical conditioning is all about forming associations between stimuli, operant conditioning involves associating our own behavior with consequences. The kid who gets a cookie for saying please, or the aquarium seal that gets a sardine for balancing a ball on its nose, they've both been trained with operant conditioning. The basic premise here is that behaviors increase when followed by reinforcement or reward, but they decrease when followed by punishment. And the most well-known champion of operant conditioning is American behaviorist B.F. Skinner. He designed the famous operant chamber, or Skinner.
Do you remember they mentioned B.F. Skinner in the previous thing also? So this is this previous meeting, like a few minutes earlier. He was talking about him.
Box, a confined space containing a lever or button that an animal can touch to get some kind of reward, typically food, along with a device that keeps track of its responses. Okay, time for a debunking break. Other than maybe Freud, no other figure in psychology seems to be as shrouded in lore and misinformation as B.F. Skinner. So I'm just going to tell you straight that no, Skinner never put any kids in the box. And no, he didn't raise his children without love or affection, and his daughter didn't hate his guts until the day she committed suicide. Deborah Skinner is alive and well, and she loved her dad plenty. Skinner did, however, invent something called an air crib, a climate-controlled box with a window on the front that was meant to keep babies warm and safe while their moms ran around doing their 1950s lady thing. It's not exactly where I'd like to spend the night, but it wasn't remotely the same as the Skinner box. No one knows where all these myths came from, but being a somewhat controversial guy, Skinner had a lot of haters, some of whom were probably happy to perpetuate misinformation. But back to the rat in the box. Basically, the box provided an observable stage to demonstrate Skinner's concept of reinforcement, which is anything that increases the behavior that it follows. In other words, you push the lever, you get a snack, and then you want to keep pushing the lever. But most rats aren't going to push a lever for no reason. I mean, there aren't food dispensing levers in the natural environment, so operant conditioning behavior requires shaping. Maybe you give the rat a little nibble of food each time it gets closer to the bar, then only when it touches the bar until little by little, in a series of successive approximations to the desired behavior, you reward them only when they do the thing you're trying to shape them to do. In everyday life, we're all continually reinforcing, shaping, and refining each other's behaviors, both intentionally and accidentally. We do this with both positive and negative reinforcement.
He mentioned about the rat, pressing the button and so on. It's not just arbitrarily do it. So context is also important. And this is what the other lady was talking about in the other TED Talk that we just watched earlier.
Positive reinforcement obviously strengthens responses by giving rewards after a desired event, like the rat snack after the lever push, or getting a cookie when you say please. Negative reinforcement is a little trickier. It's what increases the behavior by taking away an aversive or upsetting stimulus. Like, say, get in your car, and it does that infernal beeping thing until you fasten your seatbelt. The car is reinforcing your seatbelt wearing by getting rid of that horrible beeping. And it's good, because you should wear your seatbelt. It's important to recognize here that negative reinforcement is not the same as punishment. Punishment behavior either positively by, say, getting a speeding ticket, or negatively by taking away a driver's license. But negative reinforcement removes the punishing event to increase the behavior. So painkillers negatively reinforce the behavior of swallowing them by ending the headache. So by now, hopefully you're getting the picture. There are things that we want and things that we don't want, and we can be taught by way of those impulses to behave certain ways. But it's worth pointing out that conditioning is way more complex than just the cookie and the beeping car. For one thing, ending annoyance or getting a cookie are types of primary reinforcers. You don't have to learn that. They just make innate biological sense. Beeping is annoying, cookies are delicious. But there are other kinds of reinforcers that we only recognize after we learn to associate them with primary reinforcers. Like a paycheck is a conditioned reinforcer. We want money because we need food and shelter, which are still the primary. But just as there are different kinds of reinforcers, so are there various reinforcement schedules. Like those boxed rats were getting continuous reinforcement when they got a treat every single time they hit the lever, so they picked it up pretty quickly. But if one day the rat child comes, that connection quickly dwindles and the rat stops hitting the lever. This is a process called extinction, and it is important because that's how real life works. Outside of a Skinner box, you're not going to get continuous reinforcement. All of life is a series of partial or intermittent reinforcements that only occur sometimes. Learning under these conditions takes longer, but it holds.
So this is very important here. Aligning your lowercase T roots with capital T roots, understanding this concept is going to be very, very important, inshallah. So just keep that in mind as you're training yourself, as you're kind of fixing behaviors, kind of changing them, replacing with new positive behaviors and so on, and also how you need to maintain them, right? Because you might use certain reinforcements of yourself, like a study break that you might give yourself after an hour, for example. Just keep this in mind about how this might actually pan out. Whether you're going to, does reality look like a lab setting or it doesn't, right? And if it doesn't look like a lab setting, instead, what does it really look like? And how do I adjust my planning according to that?
Holds up better in the long run and is less susceptible to that extinction. So say a cafe gives out a free cup of coffee for every 10 you buy. Well, another shop pours a free double shot every Tuesday morning, and yet another has a free coffee lottery that customers win at random. These are all different kinds of intermittent reinforcement techniques. Back for more. Now, Pavlov, Watson, and Skinner's ideas were definitely controversial, as well as the whole scary rat experiments. Plenty of folks disagree with their insistence that only external influences and not internal thoughts and feelings shape behavior. It was clear to many of the behaviorists' rivals that our cognitive processes, our thoughts, perceptions, feelings, memories, also influence the way we learn. We're going to talk about how these other things factor into learning next week when we look more at conditioning, cognition, and observational learning. And yeah, also watch kids beat the face off blow-up dolls. Today, though, you learned how associative learning works, the essentials of behaviorist theory, the basic components of classical and operant conditioning, including positive and negative reinforcement and reinforcement scheduling. Thanks for watching this, especially to all of our subbable subscribers who make this whole channel possible. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of Crash Course or get a special laptop decal, or even be animated into an upcoming episode, just go to subbable.com. This episode was written by Kathleen Yale, edited by Blakey Bastino, and our consultant is Dr. Ranjit Bhagwat. Our director and editor is Nicholas Jenkins. The script supervisor is Michael Rada, who is...
Alright, I hope that gave you some understanding about like how to train your brain and so on, and how the brain works and what are the theories behind it and what it is actually fiction and what is not fiction and so on. Now, this is the last video that we have, and then...
Holiday story time! Let me get your mind right about hypnosis. First of all, it's a real thing, but it's probably not what you think it is. All kinds of hypnosis-esque practices have been around for centuries, but the Western version of it, including the kind that you probably associate with people being made to cluck like chickens on stage, cropped up around the 18th century. That's when German physician Franz Mesmer started treating all manner of medical problems by putting patients into a trance-like state, during which he claimed to align their internal magnetic forces, which he called animal magnetism. And many of these mesmerized patients did feel better, but not... Not because of any magnetism or whatever. Mesmer was inadvertently using the healing power of suggestion. In addition to his magnetic quackery, other physicians didn't appreciate Mesmer's kitschy penchant for wearing capes and playing ethereal music on a glass harmonica, and eventually he was discredited. So, were his patients just gullible idiots, or was there something else going on? Well, we've previously defined consciousness as our awareness of ourselves and our environment, and consciousness is at work pretty much whenever we're awake, but also while we're asleep and dreaming. So hypnosis is a good example of an altered state of consciousness, when you're fully conscious in a clinical sense, but also not what you'd consider a normal waking state. As a person who considers himself the product of only one of several states of consciousness, this one that I am currently in right now, it's worth pointing out how tremendously weird this is. My brain has like other gears that it drops into, in which I become, in a sense, not me anymore. Other states can also include things like hallucinations and the effects of psychoactive drugs, but these states aren't as uncommon as you might think. In fact, you've probably experienced an altered state yourself, even if you've never taken an illicit drug or been to a cheesy dinner theater where the main act wore a glittering turban. So personal opinions of Mesmer aside, here are some facts and fallacies worth knowing about hypnosis. First off, let's define hypnosis simply as a calm, trance-like state during which you tend to have a heightened concentration and focus, and in which you're typically more open to suggestion. The phenomenon has been observed in lots of empirically rigorous studies, and it's been used effectively in treatments for stress and anxiety, weight loss, and chronic pain. But it's important to understand that even though you're more open to suggestion when you're hypnotized, you do not lose control over your behavior. So contrary to what you might see in The Manchurian Candidate or Zoolander, hypnosis can't make you act totally against your will and say jump off a building, rob a donut shop, or commit a murder most foul. Nor is hypnosis a reliable way to enhance the recall of deeply buried memories. We don't file away every single one of our experiences. We only permanently store some of them, and even they tend to mutate over time. We'll be talking more about that in an upcoming lesson. Finally, only about 20% of us are thought to be highly hypnotizable. Those are the folks whom a hypnotist could get to smile at the smell of sour milk just by suggesting it was rosewater. And even though we know hypnosis can increase your suggestibility, there's still some disagreement about what exactly constitutes a hypnotic state or how it's achieved. Remember, just because we observe a phenomenon doesn't mean that we have a clue about its mechanisms of action or whether it works the way we think it works. One popular theory looks at hypnosis as a phenomenon of social influence. This camp suggests that, like,
Let me go back. He made an important point, and that's the lowercase t truth versus capital T truth.
a hypnotic state or how it's achieved. Remember, just a hypnotist could get to smile at the smell of sour milk just by suggesting it was rosewater. And even though we know hypnosis can increase your suggestibility, there's still some disagreement about what exactly constitutes a hypnotic state or how it's achieved. Remember, just because we observe a phenomenon doesn't mean that we have a clue about its mechanisms of action or
Just because we observe something doesn't mean that we understand the why it works or how it works.
whether it works the way we think it works. One popular theory looks at hypnosis as a phenomenon of social influence. This camp suggests that, like actors caught up in an intense role, hypnotized subjects may begin to feel and act like good hypnotic subjects if they just trust their hypnotist to sort of act like a director and focus their attention. Other researchers suggest that it has more to do with a special dual processing state of split consciousness called dissociation. Dissociation is a sort of detachment from your surroundings, which can range from mild spacing out all the way up to total loss of your sense of self. It's something that we all do to some degree or another, and we're often quite aware that we're doing it. It's not hard to think of instances where dissociation might help us, like when we're faced with a dangerous situation that requires quick, reflexive action and not a ton of focus on our thoughts and feelings. In this way, hypnosis may ease pain not by magically blocking pain receptors, but by helping us selectively not attend to that pain. Clinicians can do this by basically guiding the patient into a very relaxed but voluntary state, sort of spaced out, and then further guiding them through a series of positive thoughts and suggestions. So in legitimate clinical hypnosis, people aren't being made to dissociate. Instead, think of them as being asked to dissociate. And some people are just better at that than others, which is essentially what being highly hypnotizable means. So clearly, there is a lot going on.
So this is where you kind of like work with a person. They help you kind of go deep, dig deep to that memory and stuff, whatever's causing that pain and stuff, and then they help you reimagine it, or not reimagine it, but kind of like try to resolve some conflict that might have been worrying you, for example. So this is NLP. Also, this is the same similar concept used in CBT, cognitive behavior therapy.
In our two-track brains at any given time, and hypnosis, as researchers understand it, seems to help us tap into some of that adaptive dissociative capacity that we all seem to have. But say you're not so into the idea of someone feeding you suggestions. Probably the most classic way to voluntarily enter an altered state of consciousness is by using drugs. Most of us have used some kind of legal drug, your morning coffee, some Tylenol PM to put you to bed, and lots of folks responsibly use prescription and non-prescription drugs. But of course, some people develop problems. The more you use a substance, legal or illegal, the less you feel its effects as your tolerance grows. And soon enough, a 2-beer buzz turns into a 4-beer buzz or a case of beer buzz. That's your brain chemistry adapting to offset the drug effect in a process called neuroadaptation. Keep on that road and soon you'll risk a physical and or psychological addiction to the substance you choose or the substance that chose you. And that's not even to mention serious physiological and neurological damage as happens with severe and long-term alcohol abuse. We'll be delving more deeply into the science of addiction in an upcoming episode, but for now, let's take a look at some of these drug families and how they jack you up, knock you out, make you do dumb things, see imaginary stuff, and generally alter your consciousness. Psychoactive drugs are chemical substances that alter your mood and perception. They're the ones that go right to your brain synapses, mimicking the functions of neurotransmitters. They also work by tapping into the psychological component. In other words, the user's expectation about what the substance might mean. Like, if you really believe that drinking tequila makes you more aggressive, and I give you a virgin margarita, your expectation of getting all surly and aggro may actually lead you to punch someone in the neck. That's what's called the placebo.
So lowercase t truth versus capital T truth, and how our perceptions can, or our expectations and perceptions can drive our behaviors essentially.
Placebo effect. Whether smoked, snorted, ingested, or injected, we'll put all of them into 3 general categories: depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. Depressants, like alcohol, tranquilizers, and opiates, do exactly what you'd expect. They bring the mellow, slow body functions and suppress neural activity. Historically, the world's favorite depressant is alcohol. Beat writer William S. Burroughs even called it our national drug. A little bit of hooch may get the party started, but not because it's stimulating anyone. Rather, it's acting as a disinhibitor, impairing your brain's judgment areas while reducing your self-control. And then, because alcohol disrupts memory formations, you may wake up wondering where one of your eyebrows went. Similar to booze, tranquilizers, or barbiturates depress nervous system activity and may be prescribed to ease anxiety or insomnia, though high doses can negatively affect memory and judgment. And really,
So notice over here that this is like a some sort of treatment as opposed to a cure. So they try to do something to help you kind of manage your whatever context you are living in. Maybe you're overwhelmed a lot of times. Maybe you have anxiety concerns. So maybe there's a lot of things that are happening. So this helps you kind of mitigate that a little bit, or kind of like help you manage those things so you don't become debilitated essentially. So I'm not actually saying like this is good or bad or whatever. I'm just kind of giving like a why behind like why people prescribe these things, or why, or what is the objective behind treatments and so on.
Really high doses or bad interactions with other substances like alcohol can kill you. Opiates like Poppy Flower's superstar opium and its derivatives morphine and heroin work in a similar way, depressing neural activity and enveloping the brain in a fog of no pain bliss. The thing is, if a brain keeps getting flooded.
So this is what you can understand why people then go to these things, especially if they have depression and anxiety and so on. You can see why they go to these kinds of drugs, why they go to alcohol, why they abuse these substances, and how to therefore interact with people that have these situations going on. So, for example, before I got on this call right here, or in this meeting, I was in a call with somebody, and this person was doing fine before. Actually, her husband was doing fine before, and then suddenly he started like abusing substances and stuff because he was going through certain situations and stuff like that, right? And so she's like, he was never doing this before, and now he suddenly started doing that recently, and now he's doing all these like, different drugs and stuff like that. So she's worried about that. And so again, understanding why the person might be doing it helps you kind of go back, and instead of like going to them and say you should stop doing this and stuff, whatever, which they should stop doing, obviously, right? Because it's not actually fixing things. It's sort of like just kind of like keeping them at bay or kind of like treating it. But it helps you take it in a prioritized manner. If you understand the why they're doing it, you can go down deep and actually address those issues, so they'll automatically stop. Nobody likes to be drunk all the time and stuff, right? If they're doing that because they're trying to hide away from it, or like they're trying to like suppress something, or they're trying to go navigate a particular difficult situation they're going through, but they can't really think about it because it's stressing them out too much and stuff. So they try to do these kinds of things. They're not happy about it, but they're doing it because like this is the only way that they feel like it's going to help them not have to live through that pain every single moment of their waking life.
But with outside opiates, it will eventually stop brewing its own natural pain-killing neurotransmitters, endorphins. The resulting withdrawal is particularly nasty. Stimulants obviously excite rather than suppress neural activity and speed up body functions, bringing up your energy, self-consciousness, and changing your mood. On the legal end of the spectrum here, we've got caffeine, nicotine, and prescription amphetamines, building up to the more serious illegal stuff like street amphetamines, meth, ecstasy, and cocaine. And you know who loved his coke? Freud. He loved it so much, it cheered him up when he was feeling down, opened his mind, and turned him into a bit of a Chet Cathy. He even wrote his first big publication, Uber Coca, in 1884 about it. During his famous coke years in his late 20s and 30s, he believed that the drug was a viable cure for morphine addiction, which not so much. Luckily, he gave his nose a rest and finally dropped the habit by his 40s to focus full-time on his cigar addiction, which is the thing that ultimately killed him. Cocaine hits the bloodstream in a flash of energetic euphoria that quickly taxes the brain's supply of dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. Methamphetamine also triggers the release of dopamine. You'll remember from our lesson on neurotransmitters, all these chemical messengers affect our moods, emotions, attention, and alertness. So when those neurotransmitters are excessively activated, they can become temporarily depleted, which is what causes that agitative, depressive crash that users often feel. If you drink coffee every morning and then you skip a day, you'll likely be tired and cranky with a pounding headache. Now multiply that awful feeling by like thousands, and you'll see why people with coke and meth addictions might keep chasing that high while their bodies and lives fall apart around them. In addition to depressants and stimulants, we've got hallucinogens, which come in a variety of plant and fungal forms, as well as synthetic forms like LSD or lysergic acid diethylamide. Also called psychedelics, these drugs distort perceptions and evoke sensory images in the absence of actual sensory input, which means you could end up seeing, hearing, smelling, or feeling things that are not real. This could be quite nice if you're like petting a baby dolphin or something, but it could also be panic-inducing and generally messed up if you think you got a bunch of centipedes crawling around under your skin. The thing is, there are lots of ways to involuntarily
So there's something over here that when it comes to gin-related stuff, when it comes to healthcare-related stuff, sometimes people actually do feel certain things like this. So it's not necessarily that that person is hallucinating. Although in the mental health profession, this would be a condition that might be classified as something like that. But in reality, it could also be something like that. So just keep in mind that sometimes they are actually hallucinating. Sometimes they're not actually hallucinating. There's actually a situation that needs to be understood and kind of addressed and stuff, right? And that could be related to like gin or whatever and stuff. So being able to differentiate between the two is going to be important, like a skill.
Hallucinate without the use of drugs. Seizures, brain injuries, diseases, sensory deprivation, fever, stress, or even extreme grief or depression can all cause neurological disturbances that spur hallucinations of one kind or another. Many healthy people have reported experiencing vivid auditory hallucinations when in emergencies, like you broke your knee skiing and you wanted to just fall asleep forever in that blanket of soft snow, but a strong, seemingly audible voice ordered you to keep moving. And bizarrely, it isn't uncommon for people who lose the use of one sense, like vision or smell, to perceive sights and odors that they are no longer capable of sensing, as their brains pull from old memories to produce hallucinations as a way to compensate for that loss. All of this just goes to show that whether you're a psychologist, a neuroscientist, or a philosopher, our various states of consciousness provide a rich, complex world of inquiry to contemplate, showing yet again just what a messy and marvelous thing the human mind is. If your consciousness wasn't too altered today, you learned what hypnosis is and what it can and can't do, how psychoactive, depressant, stimulant, and hallucinogenic drugs work on the brain, and how non-drug-induced hallucinations can happen to anyone. Thanks for watching, especially to all of our subbable subscribers who make this whole channel possible. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of Crash Course, get a special laptop decal, or even be animated into an upcoming episode, just go to subbable.com to find out how. This episode was written by...
Alright, so going back to this question over here, how do we form and change habits in executive functioning? What are some things that could be obstacles? What are some things that we can work on? what are some things that we could do in terms of sustaining habits, new habits that we want to maintain, but also get rid of like breaking old habits and stuff like that. How do we optimize executive functioning in whatever context that we want to for it to be improved in?
I think something that I noticed commonly amongst not just like the first like TED Talk, but also like a book that we're reading in like Master's Project 100 program. Like I'm in the habits group, so we're reading a book on habits. One big thing was making sure that the goals you're making for habit building, they're more likely to be effective if they're driven by a larger purpose, like habits that are intended towards developing you into a better or different kind of person, and working on habits that are more sustainable long term rather than doing something really crazy for a short amount of time is more likely to be effective and have a longer lasting positive impact.
Yeah, good. Okay. There's also surrounding yourself with supportive people, or people doing the same thing. Yeah, for good context. Good. So context is important. Having a support system is important. Having a purpose, like an ultimate overall driving purpose, pretty much. That's very important as well. Yes. And this is what's going to happen when we're working. This is the kind of stuff that we focus on over here, right? Making sure that you have the right strategies in place and so on. So this is where we might actually go into like, what is your game plan looking like? How do you actually get yourself every single day to be able to complete certain tasks that you need to get done as part of your incremental goals, essentially, right? Okay, what else? Context is important also. So I know Asma mentioned earlier that practice is one of those things, right? Sometimes you might kind of find yourself overwhelmed by certain things. So practice is going to be very important. So yeah, practice, but also in a particular context. Having the context is very important. So you're kind of training yourself to make those associations that they were talking about as well.
Also, maybe redefining what you think is considered goal achievement. I think in the previous series, like on the Growth Through Struggle series, you spent a good amount of time talking about why people struggle with weight loss so much, and a lot of that is them expecting to lose all these pounds really fast. But more realistically, like if you made a goal to lose like 0.25 pounds in a week or 0.25 pounds in like 2 weeks and just focus on that a little bit at a time, you'll end up seeing progress 6 months later. But yeah, if you went in actually saying like, I have to lose this many pounds in this very short amount of time, it puts a lot of pressure and you're more likely to experience burnout because you're putting a goal that is more difficult to achieve, but it also takes some time for a habit to even set in. I feel like people commonly say that it takes like 27 days or something to make a habit. And although I don't know how scientifically true that is, but like that is something I've heard said a lot of times. But I also think about like the Ramadan example because we're really good at sustaining. Like Ramadan gets a lot easier by the end, not just in fasting, but the habits you built within the month, be it reading Quran at a specific time, for example, or be it not missing Fajr because you're having to get up every day for sure. And those goals get a little bit easier in the end, or being able to go without caffeine, which is a big one, I think, for a lot of people. Because in the beginning of Ramadan, it's really hard. You might have those withdrawal headaches initially, but you're probably fine by the end of it.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, you mentioned one that's a good one because you also have a group of people that you're working with. Everyone's doing the same thing and stuff. So that's what Asma was mentioning. But it's also there's a purpose behind it and stuff. So that makes you more motivated as well. And then there's this thing where like, okay, I have to do this. You put your mind to it and stuff, and so you have to push yourself to do it. So there's a lot of these things that that help you build those habits and stuff. So that's great. And so maybe you can take lessons from that experience itself, and how you were able to sustain or maintain those kind of habits of fasting, of doing good things and stuff, and so on. What were the things that were there? What was the context looking like? What was the whole situation looking like? And how can you replicate that in anything that you want to build in your own habit, like whatever it might be, the habits that you want to build? And how can you replicate those experiences, those contexts, those aspects of that context in your particular situation that you're focusing on? Yeah. And being realistic about things, very, very important over here. So in the previous, like episodes, we talked about step 0. and that's, you know, making sure that your lowercase t truth is aligned with capital T truth. And that's like one of the most important things over here, because that way you don't get burnt out. For example, people who want to gain weight, right? When they want to build muscle, for example, and they're going to work out and stuff, if they have an understanding that roughly 1 pound you can gain in a week, then it's a lot easier for them to, like, you know, count like that, right? So approximately 1 pound is if what they're working on. So they're not going to be like, you know what, I need to, like, you know, get like maybe like 30 pounds in like 10 weeks or something like that, right? That's like saying like I'm going to get 3 pounds per week and stuff, which is not really going to work out, because it's like about half a pound a day, and that doesn't really work out like that, right? So if I don't get that, I'm going to get overwhelmed and frustrated and stuff, because I had the wrong expectation. My lowercase t truth did not align with capital T truth, and so that overwhelmed me. That kind of caused me to burn out. So if you don't want to be stressed, if you don't want to be, you know, burnt out, if you don't want to get overwhelmed and frustrated and annoyed ever in life, ever, and I say ever, like, you know, I actually mean ever, you just have to make sure that your capital T truths, or that your lowercase t truths, are aligning with capital T truths, and you're always flexible. And this is the neuroplasticity. You're always flexible in being able to, you know, like navigate this. So being flexible, meaning always be ready to accept that, hey, I don't know necessarily the capital T truth, so I'm always open to learning it. I'm always open to adapting to that stuff, right? Because it's only going to make my life easier, and that's not going to make it difficult. The more I accept capital T truth, the more I decide that I'm not going to be. I don't know if you remember, like one of the in that part of the series, for the first eight episodes. In that part, not this one. This numbering is, you know, with the new framing. The old one was growth through struggle. But in there, I had, you know, one part where we were talking about a maze and how to, like, get through a maze. And I said that, you know, if you imagine if you're going through the maze, but you're standing at one part of the wall that you got stuck at, and you're just banging at it and stuff, so you're just kind of hoping that it opens up and it becomes a door, right? Somehow or another, it becomes a door, and you could just pass through it. But if you keep on doing that, it's not going to change. It's still a wall, right? In real life, if you really kind of like push yourself, like, I have to go it this way, I have to do it this way and stuff, right? And it cannot be any other way and stuff. And it's not going to change, because, you know, reality doesn't change on our terms. It's designed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accommodate everyone's reality, everyone's experiences, and so on, right? So if I'm sitting there trying to change reality, and I'm hoping that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to change the entire universe's function and stuff for a little me, like little tiny me right here, that doesn't make any sense, right? So what I do, I need to adjust myself and say, okay, well, there are doors out there. I just need to figure out where the doors are, and take the door, right? Instead of waiting over here for this wall to become a door, which is not going to become, and then getting frustrated that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not helping me out, like, you know, Allah is not looking out for me or whatever, or that people are not helping me out and stuff, or that I must be a failure or something like that. I just need to take a step back and say, oh wait, this is a wall. Oh, there's a door. Let me take the door over there, right? It makes your life a lot easier, less stressful, less overwhelming, less frustrating, less burning out, all that stuff. So, yeah, definitely making sure that your lowercase t truths align with capital T truths, it's very important. So, yeah, and again, those lowercase t truths might be about how habits are formed, and if they don't match with capital T truths about how habits are formed, then you're not going to be able to maintain them. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to give up. I actually have a case right now where there is a kid. He is. I reached out a few days ago to his mom, and I used to teach him, so I connected with him, connected with his mom, and I said, you know, I've been thinking about him for a few days. How is he doing? You know, he was going through some things and stuff before. So she said, you know, like, she just was really excited that, you know, I contacted her and stuff, and she was like, you know, I'm overwhelmed and stuff, and it's like, you know, really, like, I don't know what to do and stuff. He's doing drugs and stuff, and he's saying that he wants to do drugs because he likes it. But I said, you know, so, like, when she was mentioning all these things, I said, like, you know, what I'm thinking over here is that he's struggling with himself, and he doesn't actually want to do drugs, and he doesn't actually like where he's at right now in life, but he's not able to, you know, come clean about it. So he's having these inadequacies and, like, these feelings of, like, incompetence, and, like, you know, it's like just frustration about himself, and kind of like he doesn't like it, you know, there's a lot of that stuff, right? So as soon as I said that, she's like, everything that you said, that's exactly what is happening with him and stuff, right? So I said, so ultimately he doesn't actually not want to let go of his drugs, but it's just a matter of, like, and he's saying that, even he's saying, like, you know, I want to keep doing drugs because I like it, but in reality he's not actually telling the truth, because he's trying to, like, hide behind this front, right? So ultimately, when we realize that this person is maybe really trying, but they're not, like they're trying to break this habit or they're trying to get out of this situation and stuff, but they're not able to, then it makes it a lot easier for us to help them accordingly too. So that's an important thing to understand, lowercase t truth versus capital T truth in terms of how to like break habits. Here, he doesn't know how to do it, and so he's not able to break out of his things, right? And he thinks that no matter what he does, things are not going to work out. So he gave up because he didn't know the lowercase t truth. He didn't realize that his lowercase t truth actually didn't match with capital T truth about how to break habits, how to do things that are going to build positive habits and so on. And so he just sort of gave up. So it's very important to do that, to align those two truths, because if we don't align them, things get overwhelming. As Matt said, putting checkpoints for yourself, like you mentioned as well, seeing if you see progress and then making more progress. Yeah. Being open to changing your mind, your method is very important. And that's the aspect of discipline. That's why I asked about discipline, and that's why that was one of our check-in questions over here. The word discipline over here, and so we described it over here when we talked about it. It's like, it's more like data-driven. You could say it's data-driven, assessment-based. It is something that companies use. It is something organizations use. It's something that people use, groups use, and stuff, always to make sure that they're kind of like optimizing whatever they're doing to match with capital T truth. They're going to find new things out as they go along, but they have to keep adjusting themselves, and that's part of the process. This is part of how life works. If I don't want to do that, then it's just me not accepting the capital T truth, and then I'm going to get frustrated. I'm going to be the one that's going to feel negative about it and stuff. I'm going to be the one who keeps on getting burnt out, keeps getting frustrated, annoyed, and overwhelmed and things like that. So having the right expectations based on the capital T truth is going to help you move forward. And remember, we always set our planning according to our expectations, not according to our hopes. Expectations, meaning capital T truths, right? We're going to align our planning based on that, and if things go exactly how we expected or how capital T truth looks like, then we're good, we're happy. But in some cases, things might go even better than that, and that's where our hope is, like that's where we hope. Our hopes are higher than our expectations, so that helps us not get frustrated and stuff. So don't mix the two together. Sometimes we mix them two together, and sometimes we plan for our hopes and not for our expectations and stuff. And sometimes our expectations are aligned with lowercase t truths and not with capital T truth. So fixing this up a little bit is gonna really help in terms of stress management and like just overall like actual success in life, inshallah, just progress in life. Any other thoughts on this?
It kind of reminds me of there's a certain goal setting mnemonic called SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. That's what it kind of reminds me. Like, you want to keep your expectations in terms of like how you're going to form and like change your habits and everything. You want to have something like more specific in mind. You don't want to just say something kind of like generic, like my goal is to be a better Muslim. Maybe your goal is to, I don't know, fast 1 day a week extra or something, or read one word of the Quran,
Yeah. So the SMART goals, we actually went over that a little bit before. So yeah, that's where we got this idea, that it has to be realistic and so on. And actually, I would say like SMART is one of the things, and one of the ways. There's actually other ways to look at goals too. In addition to SMART, there's another framing as well. So what they're doing is trying to actually really focus on this aspect of like, being realistic, like having these things that, they actually take all of these things that we've been talking about and consolidate it into an easy to remember, I guess, acronym that helps you kind of move forward accordingly. Yeah, so project managers are actually using this kind of stuff. Of course, they try to come up with different framing, and other than SMART as well, to see if somebody else can benefit with that new framing or different framing. And sometimes they use SMART, and sometimes they use like whatever else that might be. So yeah, definitely. Cynthia, so you mentioned about okay, so you mentioned about executive. You asked the question about executive functioning. So this is where a person, for example, like being able to how should I say it? So for example, if I want to be able to sustain, like being like, let's say a person is having trouble with brushing their teeth, for example, right? and they just really can't get themselves to do it, or they're not able to sustain that. So this is what that idea, like this is where that concept is going to come in. So how do you get yourself to be able to do something, and number one, and number two, how do you maintain that habit, right? So for example, if you need to brush your teeth, so number one, how do you actually get yourself to do it in the first place? And number two, how do you get yourself to keep doing it over and over again when you need to do it, right? Or when you need to, for example, cook food at a certain time, or leave your house at a certain time for a meeting or something like that, or whatever it is. These are things that could be under that umbrella of executive functioning. Any other comments or questions?
I don't know if we talked about this much yet, or maybe you have in previous episodes, but in regards to changing habits or getting rid of bad habits, I feel like that wasn't talked about as much in some of the videos that we covered today, but do you have a general point on that? Or what does it take for a person to have enough, maybe someone has enough motivation, but like realistically changing habits, I think can be challenging. And I think it's sometimes different than taking the initiative of building a new habit that's like unrelated to their life. Like for example, like if I'm studying for an exam, that's like something I'm doing temporarily, but I'm building a habit regularly to study for that exam, like maybe a certain amount of time a day or something. But when you're trying to get rid of a bad habit, it's something you've internalized as a regular part of your life in some way, shape, or form. What is the actually, like, what is like the Islamic perspective on that, on what is the etiquette in doing so, or the process, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So actually, we've talked about bits and pieces that, if you can piece together in the previous things. However, we haven't actually put it together like this. So today was the day that I was going to, introduce kind of like that concept based on all the things that we've accumulated so far, right? And so, for example, one of the things is that if you understand that, if you accept that, okay, this is a bad habit, number one, and number two, you understand some of the aspects of how brains work, right, and how habits are formed and developed and so on, then we can actually talk about after that how to break habits and stuff. So among the things that they talked about today, for example, were the behaviorism theory, right, or like the association, the idea of like associating certain things, and so what happens is that you might feel like, okay, let me rephrase that. Okay, let's say that you are doing a habit, and this is something that you have been doing for some time, and it became sort of internalized, and this is just how it is, right? If you want to break that cycle, one of the things you have to do is say, okay, my brain is primed to react in a certain context because of a certain stimulus in a certain way, and this is sort of like what it's got trained to. And what I need to do now is I need to see like what is going wrong with this aspect. Let's say, for example, I'm used to sleeping at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm constantly missing Fajr, for example. Give me 1 second. I'm just gonna read what you said in the chat. Okay, habitual lying in kids, okay, or not flossing, or missing Fajr, or having too much sugar in your diet, or okay, yeah, sleeping late, really late and stuff. Okay, so you want to break this habit, right? Number one, you have to understand what you're trying to do instead, right, and why you're trying to do it. So purpose is going to be very, very important. If you don't have that purpose, then you're not going to be able to like be motivated to break that cycle. Now, assuming that you have a purpose in mind, you have the ability in mind, as in this is something under your control, right, and that is something we have in control when it comes to habits and stuff, right, and you also feel like you have multiple options you can pick from. So that's the idea of motivation, right? If you have that motivation, by that definition of it, right, then we can focus on what are the capital T truths when it comes to breaking these habits. And so how is the mind sort of adapted? How is the mind adapted to a particular habit that you've been doing? And that's it. So remember, purpose is the driver over here. You really want to change it. Now then it's a matter of putting the right strategies in place, right? And so that's where we come in over here. You want your end vision is you want to have a new habit. Your current status is, for example, you're sleeping too late, or whatever it is that your process is looking right now, but also where your state is currently. You're missing Fajr, for example, because you're sleeping too late and stuff, and because you're eating too late or whatever and stuff, or whatever that situation might look like, right? So because of that, this is where your situation is now. What we're going to say is that, okay, one of the things that we're going to try to remove is sleeping late. So how do we get ourselves to sleep earlier, right? So maybe there's something where you're waking up too late and stuff. in the morning. Let's say you're waking up at like, I don't know, 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. So obviously you're not going to be sleepy, right? So one of the things you could say is that maybe there's an alarm that I need to set, or maybe somebody's going to have to wake me up and stuff. Some external person is going to have to come wake me up. Whatever it takes, just wake me up, right? Even if I'm really tired and stuff, I need to get myself up. And remember over here, if you have motivation, when you do wake up, you're going to tell yourself, okay, get up. Even if you're like, having difficulty, you're going to tell yourself, no, I need to break this habit and stuff. So I need to get up now. I know I'm kind of really tired and stuff and all that, but I need to get up. So this is where you kind of like want this to happen. So you actually force yourself up. Now, in this case, the reason you couldn't wake up was because you needed somebody external to wake you up, and you couldn't tell yourself in your sleep that, hey, time to wake up and stuff, right? So you couldn't do that. That's why you weren't waking up. So if somebody actually wakes you up, your brain is telling yourself, oh, great, I'm awake. Okay, whatever it takes, don't let your body fall asleep again, right? So you get up and stuff, you do whatever it takes because you're driven by that. Does that make sense? And so if there was an obstacle that was not in your control, you can put something external there to help you in that, whether it's somebody waking you up, something like, maybe you have like a foghorn and stuff that just activates and stuff at a certain time, whatever it takes and stuff, right? Bright lights come up, whatever it takes to get you to wake up. So you wake up, and even if you're feeling extremely tired and stuff, you still get up because your brain is driving your actions. You're going to feel really like, like slouched and stuff, whatever, but you can have something prepared the night before. You can say, hey, I'm going to have, some, like at a certain time, coffee is going to be ready because you have one of those automatic coffee things or whatever. So it's going to be ready. I have everything ready in it and stuff. All it takes is like, it activates at a certain time. It gets the water, ready and stuff. It's like everything's good to go. Then by the time that, I get woken up, then I'm going to go and drink that coffee and stuff. I'm going to have some energy and stuff. Maybe you can have like some sort of meal that's going to give you some energy and stuff like that. Now, obviously you're going to feel tired. You're going to just want to go back to sleep and stuff, but you're going to keep telling yourself no. But then let's say at 10 o'clock, you sort of like, you've already had this in mind. Okay, 10 o'clock, like I haven't had enough sleep, and my body is gonna like keep trying to fall asleep, but 10 o'clock I'm gonna let myself fall asleep, right? And then I have somebody helping me wake up at a certain time, like Fajr or something like that. Now again, having that group of people or having that support, like family support or something else, can actually help you in terms of waking up and stuff, right? Maybe you have people that you are working together with and stuff, like somebody else, like you call each other and say, okay, I'm gonna call you at Fajr time or something like that, or you call me at Fajr time or whatever, and you're like, your mom wakes you up and stuff, and like, okay, let's do whatever and stuff. So you call that person and stuff, and you have something that you want to work on at like 7 o'clock in the morning sharp, and so you make sure that that happens and stuff, because you have something else kind of like holding you responsible to wake up. But at the same time, somebody is also waking you up. But at the same time, you have something in place like coffee or something like that to get you up and stuff like that, right? So if you do these kinds of things externally, step by step, you can build on these. You can continuously build on that, and then you can continue assessing yourself. This is where the data-driven assessment-based optimization comes in. You can keep trying to optimize by saying, okay, maybe 10 o'clock wasn't enough. Maybe I need to go to sleep at 9 o'clock. Okay, this is trial and error, right? Figure out your capability truth by figuring out that sweet spot of the time when you need to go to sleep, right? Maybe there are certain activities that you're doing that is keeping you up, that might be keeping you up, or maybe that you could do that can actually help you fall asleep faster. For example, maybe you're not having enough activities during the day that are tiring you out. So maybe you can add in something that's going to be strenuous, that's actually going to exhaust you, and you're going to fall asleep, right? So you can add these things to yourself, like these procedures and steps and stuff like that to help you. So part of understanding, like part of breaking a habit is to understand why you have the habit in the first place, right? And how can you influence that to break that, whatever the cycle. Because if you really want it in your heart, and that everyone has the ability to break habits, right? And you have a purpose behind it, you really know why you're doing it. Like that purpose is what wakes you up in the morning. That purpose is that something that just like makes you do whatever it is that you do in your regular daily life and stuff, right? That purpose that really like drives you every single day. It's something that you can plan for like 10 years, and you can wait patiently for 10 years and stuff to get to and stuff. That purpose would be something that if you have that, I hope that made sense. So remember, you're never really held hostage, essentially. You are, if you really want it and you have that greater purpose, habits are easy to form and break if you really want it. But if you don't want it and you have this what they call like can't remember the word right now, but it's like indecision. When you have this indecision, you're like, I want something, but at the same time you're like, yeah, but I really feel like I don't want it and stuff. Like I feel comfortable where I'm at and stuff. Like I want it, but I really don't want it, right? If you have that kind of indecision, then obviously you're not going to be serious about it. But I'm talking about motivation, where you're like, no matter what it takes, like you feel like you're just looking for an escape. Right? You're just stuck in the situation, and whatever it takes, you'll do. Right? That's the kind of mindset where you can actually go on, inshallah. Okay, so yeah, let me actually stop the recording, so you guys can ask me questions that that are not going to be uploaded, inshallah. So let me stop that really quick. So I'm actually going to stop this here. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.